Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we bring you a story that arrives straight from the depths of heartbreak and hope, a tale that begins with a promise and ends with a truth few dare to face. Our guest today is Jonathan Hale, a man who reached out to share an experience that changed the course of his life forever. He trusted us with every detail, every regret, every moment that still echoes in his mind. What you are about to hear is told exactly as he lived it. This is his voice, his memory, and his truth. Now let us step into the world he once believed would lead to a future he could call his own. My name is Jonathan Hale, and before everything that followed, my life was quiet, in a way that felt both safe and suffocating. I lived in a small coastal town where the evenings smelled of salt and iron from the boats returning late, and the mornings slid by with the same familiar rhythm. I worked as a mechanical inspector at a shipyard, a job I had held for nearly a decade. People often assume that the constant clang of metal or the hum of the welding stations wipes away loneliness. But silence has a way of finding you even in the loudest places. Mine found me every night when I returned home to an empty apartment that echoed more than it should have. I was 36 when the story began. Old enough to understand caution, yet young enough to believe that life still had a surprise waiting somewhere. My friends liked to say I was the responsible one, the steady one, the one least likely to make reckless choices. They were not wrong. Most of my life had been built through careful steps, slow commitments, and a tendency to choose the safer road. Still, quiet years have a way of wearing a groove into a person. Even the strongest walls start to feel thin when the nights grow long. It was during one of those nights that I found myself staring at my reflection in a dark window and asking a question that had sat untouched in the back of my mind. What if this was it? What if the life I was living was all I would ever know? The thought frightened me more than I expected. Not because I was unhappy, but because I felt incomplete in a way I could not name. My parents were gone, my siblings lived in distant cities, and the small circle of friends I had were moving on in their own ways. Marriages, children, new homes, new beginnings. I attended their celebrations with genuine happiness. Yet each time I returned home, I felt as if a quiet voice whispered that my own life had fallen behind. It was not jealousy. It was a kind of grief for something I had not yet found. For years, I convinced myself that work and routine were enough, that companionship was a luxury, not a necessity. But as time passed, the silence began to sit heavier. I would notice couples walking along the harbour, laughing softly while the wind tugged at their jackets. I would watch families gather for weekend meals at the diner near the waterfront, the kind where people lean close over the table because they have something worth sharing. I did not envy them as much as I longed to feel what they felt. A sense of belonging, a place to lean, a life that intertwined with another. The turning point came on a late autumn night when the rain hammered against the windows and the power flickered 3 times before settling into darkness. I lit a candle, sat on the couch, and felt the weight of the quiet wrap around me like a thick blanket. It was in that moment that I reached for my phone, not out of boredom, but out of a need to feel connected to someone somewhere. That decision did not feel extraordinary at the time. It felt small, almost forgettable. But in the story of my life, it became the moment when everything began to shift. I started browsing through travel forums, photography groups, and expat communities. At first, I was drawn only by curiosity. The world felt larger in those pages. People talked about distant beaches, crowded streets filled with bright colours, markets alive with unfamiliar scents, and the warmth of strangers willing to guide lost travellers. I found myself reading for hours, letting their stories temporarily fill the empty spaces in my own. It was a way of imagining a different life without stepping out of my own. That was when I first saw a post written by a woman from Thailand who talked about her home in Chiang Rai. She described it with such tenderness that the words seemed to glow. Her message was simple, something about morning mist rolling over green hills and how the world felt softer at sunrise. There was nothing flirtatious or intentional about it. It was just a moment captured in words. Yet for reasons I could not explain, I read it 3 times. Her perspective carried a warmth that felt foreign and inviting, as if the world she lived in held a kind of gentleness I had never known. I did not message her that night. I simply bookmarked the post and went to sleep with the strange sensation that my life had tilted slightly, almost imperceptibly, in a new direction. I had no way of knowing that the silence I had lived in for so long was about to break. I had no idea that a single spark from across the world would soon become a fire large enough to pull me out of the life I had always known. What I did know, as I closed my eyes, was that I felt something I had not felt in years. Anticipation, a small trembling hope that maybe the world had been waiting for me to look beyond my own shadow. That was the beginning. The moment when my quiet life took its first fragile step toward a story I was never prepared to live. I did not expect anything to change after that night. People bookmark things all the time, save ideas they never return to, make small promises to themselves that fade under the weight of routine. Yet the next evening, as I sat on my couch still wearing my work jacket, I found myself opening the same forum again. I searched for her post without even realizing what I was looking for. When I found it, the words felt just as warm as I remembered. Her name was Nisha, a simple profile without much information, only a photo of a hillside bathed in soft morning light. No face, no personal details, just the view she loved. This time, instead of closing the app, I typed a short message beneath her post. It felt safe, harmless, just a polite appreciation of her description. I thanked her for sharing something so peaceful. I mentioned that it made my own grey harbour town feel a little less heavy. I almost deleted it twice before pressing send. It felt like tossing a message into a vast ocean, expecting nothing to wash back. But something did. The next morning, as I was drinking my first cup of coffee in the break room at work, my phone buzzed. It was a notification from the forum. She had replied. Her message was brief, but something about it caught me immediately. She wrote that she was happy her words reached someone far away, that she believed even small moments could connect strangers, and that the world felt a little kinder when people shared what they loved. Her English was gentle, slightly imperfect, but filled with sincerity. She ended with a simple question. What was my town like? It was such an innocent inquiry, yet for the first time in years I found myself wanting to answer someone honestly. Instead of sending a quick reply, I waited until lunch break. I stepped outside where the wind smelled faintly of seawater and typed a longer message. I told her about the rust-coloured hulls of the ships, the pier where fishermen gathered before dawn, the old lighthouse that barely worked anymore, and the quiet streets that always seemed to be bracing for rain. I told her that my life was steady but often lonely. I hesitated before adding that last part, but something about her message made honesty come easier. Her response came that evening. She apologized that my life felt lonely and said she believed loneliness was a shadow that followed many people, even in places filled with sunshine. She told me about her own city, small but bright, filled with markets where people sold flowers, fruit, and hand-woven fabrics. She spoke of narrow streets that echoed with the sound of motorbikes and children laughing. It sounded like a world painted in colours I had never known. Over the next days, our messages grew longer. What began as polite exchanges turned into detailed conversations about life, hope, disappointments, and dreams that neither of us had ever voiced to strangers before. Her words were always warm, always curious. She asked about my family, my past relationships, my work, my hopes for the future. I found myself checking my phone more often, waiting for her replies in a way that surprised me. Nights that were once ruled by silence now carried a quiet anticipation. One evening she sent me a picture, not of herself, but of the same hillside from her profile taken at sunrise. The sky looked like a watercolor painting, soft and unreal. Beneath it she wrote that she hoped I would see that place one day, that perhaps the world had more to offer me than ships and shadows. I did not know why her message affected me as deeply as it did. Maybe it was the faith she had in a stranger. Maybe it was the possibility she represented. Maybe it was simply the fact that someone somewhere believed my life could be more than it was. Her words felt like light slipping into a room I had kept dim for too long. As the days turned into weeks, our exchanges became a part of my routine, something I looked forward to in a way that startled me with its intensity. I caught myself smiling at my phone during breaks, rereading certain lines, analyzing the subtle warmth hidden in her phrasing. My co-workers noticed the change, though they only teased me lightly. I brushed it off, yet inside I felt something waking up, something both exhilarating and frightening. Late one night, after a long conversation, she ended her message with a sentence that lingered with me long after I turned off the screen. She wrote that sometimes the right connections arrive quietly, like a sunrise slipping over a distant hill, and that perhaps we were discovering one of those rare moments. I fell asleep with her words in my mind, unaware that each message was drawing me closer to a turning point I could neither predict nor undo. Weeks passed, and the distance between my world and Nisha's began to feel strangely smaller. Her messages were no longer just words on a screen. They became a quiet presence in my life, a thread connecting two people separated by continents, but pulled together by something neither of us could fully understand. Our conversations drifted from simple descriptions of daily routines into deeper places. She told me about her childhood in northern Thailand, the wooden house her father built, the sound of rain hitting banana leaves, and the river where she learned to swim. She spoke of her mother, who sold flowers in the market, and how the scent of jasmine still reminded her of home even when she moved south for work. There was a warmth to her memories that I found captivating, as if her past carried colors I had never seen. In return, I shared pieces of myself I rarely spoke about. I told her about my father teaching me how to repair engines, about my mother humming old songs while cooking, about the quiet ache that settled in me after their loss. She didn't respond with pity. Instead, she wrote that grief only proves how deeply we are capable of loving, and that losing people does not mean losing the parts of ourselves they shaped. Her words felt like balm pressed against an old bruise. As our exchanges deepened, something shifted. I found myself rushing home after work, not because I was tired, but because I wondered if she had written. I carried my phone with a kind of nervous excitement I had not felt since my early 20s. It was irrational, almost embarrassing, yet undeniably real. She had become a presence woven into the rhythm of my days. One weekend, while I was fixing a faulty generator at the shipyard, I received a voice message from her. It was the first time I ever heard her speak. Her voice was soft with an accent that made every word sound delicate, as if she was choosing each syllable with care. She apologized for sending a recording without asking, explaining that she wanted me to hear the sound of the morning birds near her window. The recording captured her quiet laughter in the background, and for a moment the distance between us disappeared. I replayed that message more times than I care to admit. From that day on, voice messages became a part of our conversations. Hearing her speak made everything feel more tangible. I could imagine her sitting on her balcony, the warm air brushing against her hair, the sounds of her neighborhood drifting softly behind her. She told me about her long shifts at the spa where she worked, the tourists she met, and the dreams she carried but rarely shared with others. She admitted that she often felt unseen, valued more for her kindness than her aspirations. I told her she deserved a life where her dreams mattered just as much as her gentleness. She said no one had ever told her that before. As days turned into months, we crossed another invisible line. Our conversations grew intimate, not in a romantic sense, but in the way two strangers become each other's confidants. She confessed fears about her future, the uncertainty of her job, the family she financially supported. I shared my doubts about my own life, the feeling that I had drifted too long without purpose. She encouraged me to believe I still had time to start over. I encouraged her to chase a life where she felt more than obligated. Late one night, she wrote that she wished she could sit beside me at the harbour, listening to the waves crash against the rocks, watching the lights reflect on the water. She said she imagined the world would feel peaceful there, a place where she could breathe freely. I closed my eyes and pictured her next to me, the outline of her shoulders against the dim glow of the pier. The image felt too vivid, too familiar for someone I had never met. It was during another late conversation when she said something that left me quietly stunned. She told me that if life had been kinder to her, she would have chosen a future where she could build something real with someone like me. She said she felt safe with me, understood, as if I were a place she had been searching for without knowing. Her message was not a declaration, not a confession, but it was enough to shift something inside my chest. I realized then how deeply she had rooted herself into my days, how naturally she had filled the emptiness I once carried alone. The bridge between us had grown strong, built not from grand gestures but from shared truths, quiet moments, and the fragile hope that perhaps fate had brought us into each other's lives for a reason. I did not know it yet, but this bridge would soon pull me farther than I had ever imagined, crossing oceans and boundaries I once believed were unmovable. The idea of travelling to Thailand began as a passing thought, the kind you tell yourself is only a dream. Yet as my connection with Nisha grew, that dream settled deeper into my mind until it became something I could no longer ignore. One night, after she sent me a photo of a lantern festival in Chiang Mai, its sky filled with drifting lights like glowing wishes, I felt something shift inside me. I wanted to see her world with my own eyes. I wanted to step into the places she described so softly. And more than anything, I wanted to know if the bond we had created could survive outside the glow of a screen. I booked the ticket 2 weeks later. It felt like a reckless decision, a leap I never imagined myself taking. But the moment I clicked confirm, I felt an electric rush that pushed away all hesitation. When I told her, she replied instantly with a voice message filled with surprise and something that sounded like disbelief. She told me she felt nervous and excited at the same time, that she never expected I would travel so far to meet her. She said the world suddenly felt smaller and brighter. The day of my departure, I walked through the airport, carrying a strange mix of fear and anticipation. The long flight gave me too much time to imagine every possibility. What if she looked at me and felt nothing? What if we stood face to face and the warmth vanished? But the stronger fear, the one that settled deep in my chest, was that meeting her would change me in ways I could not undo. When the plane descended over Bangkok, the sight of the sprawling city beneath the soft haze of afternoon heat made my pulse quicken. The air felt thick and alive the moment I stepped off the aircraft. The scent of spices, exhaust, and humid air filled my lungs. Everything felt louder, brighter, more chaotic than my quiet coastal town. I'd stepped into a world that pulsed with energy. I waited for her at a small cafe near my hotel, my hands clasped around a cold drink I barely touched. I must have checked the door 100 times in the span of 10 minutes. When she finally walked in, everything inside me froze. She wore a simple white dress and carried a shy smile that made her seem even softer than her voice. She was smaller than I imagined, delicate in a way that made the room feel too big for her. But her eyes held the same warmth I had felt through every message. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she laughed quietly, a sound I recognized instantly, but now felt infinitely more real. She reached out, touched my arm with a hesitant hand, and whispered that she could not believe I was actually standing in front of her. I told her I felt the same, though my voice cracked slightly. The world had narrowed to just the two of us. We spent that first day walking through the bustling streets of Bangkok. Motorbikes zipped past in unpredictable patterns, street vendors called out in melodic rhythms, and the air shimmered under the weight of the heat. She guided me with gentle confidence, weaving through crowds with small steps that I tried to match. She showed me golden temples that glowed against the sky, markets filled with the scent of grilled food and ripe mango, and narrow alleys where stray cats lounged lazily in patches of shade. Each moment felt surreal. She would occasionally look up at me with a shy smile, as if checking whether I was still real. I found myself memorizing the way she tucked her hair behind her ear, the way she laughed quietly when she was nervous, and the way her voice softened when she spoke about places that meant something to her. As evening settled, we stood on a pedestrian bridge overlooking the river. The water reflected the city lights, turning everything into a wash of shimmering colors. She leaned against the railing and said she had never met someone who listened to her like I did, someone who cared about her stories as if they were precious. She told me she felt safe with me, safer than she had expected. I felt something heavy and warm settle in my chest. It was the closest thing to peace I had felt in years. She led me to a small rooftop bar tucked between taller buildings. The air was warm, the sky a deep violet, and the music a soft murmur beneath the night. We talked for hours, not about grand things, but about fears, dreams, and the strange fortune that had brought us together. She told me she had not felt hopeful in a long time until I entered her life. I told her she had shown me a world beyond my narrow routines. When she rested her head lightly on my shoulder, it felt like the final piece of a puzzle I had not known was incomplete. The city hummed around us, but all I heard was her breath, steady and close. That night, as I walked back to my hotel, I realized something with startling clarity. The bridge we built across oceans had become real. I had stepped onto it fully, trusting it with my heart, unaware of how fragile it truly was. Tomorrow, I thought, everything will begin to unfold, and I had no idea how right I was. The days that followed moved like a dream threaded with moments too vivid to forget. Every morning, I woke with a strange mixture of peace and fear, the kind that comes when something precious begins to feel real. Nisha and I explored the city together, wandering through markets where bright fabrics fluttered like captured rainbows, stepping into quiet temples where the scent of incense hovered in the air, and drifting along the river as long-tail boats skated across the water with slender grace. Each moment felt like it belonged to a life I had once believed out of reach. One evening, after a long day spent wandering the older districts of the city, she took my hand with a sense of confidence she had never shown before. She led me through narrow streets until we reached a row of neon-lit restaurants, each glowing in deep pinks and electric blues. The sky was shifting towards night, and the lights reflected off the damp pavement like broken pieces of a dream. She smiled up at me and said she wanted to share a place that made her feel hopeful, a place she visited whenever she needed to imagine a brighter future. The restaurant was small, crowded, and alive with the clatter of plates and the sound of a guitar drifting from a corner speaker. She ordered dishes for us both, laughing when I hesitated at the spicier options. When the food arrived, she watched me take the first bite with anticipation. My reaction made her burst into soft laughter that seemed to melt into the warm lights around us. She looked happier than I had ever seen her. As we ate, she spoke about her dreams with a rare openness. She said she wanted stability, a home of her own, maybe a small business one day. She confessed her fear of being trapped in jobs that drained her energy but offered no future. She said she had spent too many years taking care of others and not enough caring for herself. Then she looked at me with a quiet seriousness and said that meeting me made her believe that a different life might be possible. A life with someone who respected her, someone who saw her for who she truly was. Her words struck me with gentle force. I told her she deserved everything she hoped for, that she was stronger than she believed, and that she had already built more resilience than most people I knew. She listened with her eyes lowered, shy yet deeply moved. When she raised her gaze, there was something vulnerable there, something hopeful. After dinner, we walked along the street lined with neon signs. The city around us pulsed with life, but it felt distant, like a backdrop to whatever was forming between us. She slipped her hand into mine again, tighter this time, as if afraid of letting go. She said she had been waiting to meet someone who understood her heart, someone who made her feel valued. And then, almost in a whisper, she said she believed we could build a future together. The words settled inside me with a weight that felt both terrifying and extraordinary. I had not expected to hear something so profound, not so soon. But as she spoke, I realized I felt the same. She had become the light at the edge of the quiet life I had lived for so long. She had shown me color, possibility, and connection. I told her I believed in us too. I told her that for the first time in years, I could see a road ahead that did not feel lonely, and I meant every word. Her expression shifted into something radiant. She moved closer and rested her forehead against mine, her breath warm with the scent of jasmine. She whispered that she wanted us to face the future as partners, that she wanted to trust in something real again. In that moment, the world around us dissolved into shimmering lights and distant sounds. It felt as though time had paused just long enough to let us breathe inside the fragile promise we had created. Later, we sat at a rooftop bar overlooking the river. The lights reflected off the dark water in streaks of pink, gold, and violet. She leaned against me, her fingers tracing idle shapes on my arm. She spoke of plans in a soft voice, imagining the life we might build. She said we could visit her hometown, meet her family, see the hills she once described to me in messages. She imagined moments that reached into the future like gentle branches. I listened, feeling the warmth of her closeness and the pull of her hopes. As the night deepened, she turned to me with a look I had not seen before, a look filled with trust. She said she believed destiny had brought us together. She said the world felt different with me in it, safer and brighter. I held her close, unable to shake the sense that this moment was shaping something irreversible. Promises made under neon skies have a way of feeling eternal. They glow with a kind of magic that convinces you the world will bend to protect them. I believed every word we shared that night. I believed in us. I believed in her. I did not know then that some promises shine brightest just before they fade into darkness. The night before it happened felt strangely calm. We had spent the evening walking along the river, listening to the soft hum of city life as it settled beneath the warm sky. She seemed quieter than usual, thoughtful in a way I could not quite interpret. When I asked if something was wrong, she smiled and said she was simply tired from the week. I believed her. I wanted to believe her. We said goodnight outside my hotel and she held my hand a moment longer than usual before letting go. That moment would later replay in my mind like the final frame of a film, still and haunting. I woke early the next morning with a feeling I could not explain, an uneasy sense stirring beneath my ribs. I checked my phone out of habit, expecting a message from her like every other morning. There was nothing. No good morning, no missed call, no late-night confession typed half asleep. Silence greeted me with a heaviness I had never felt before. I told myself not to read into it. People get busy, phones die, sleep drags longer than expected. But as the hours ticked by and the screen remained blank, doubt began to seep into the corners of my thoughts. I sent her a message, then another. When still nothing came, I called her. The call rang twice, then went straight to a disconnected tone I had never heard before. I felt a coldness spread through my chest. By noon, fear had lodged itself firmly in my throat. I left the hotel and walked the familiar route to the cafe where we often met. I sat at our usual table, watching the door with a tension that grew sharper by the minute. She did not appear. I ordered a drink just to have something to hold, but it sat untouched as I cycled through every possibility. Maybe she was sick. Maybe her phone broke. Maybe there had been an emergency at work. Still, nothing explained the silence, the sudden vanishing of the person who had been my daily constant for months. I went to the spa where she worked. Her co-workers recognized her name, but looked confused when I asked for her. One woman checked the schedule and told me Nisha had not shown up that day. Another added that she had been talking about taking time off soon, but never mentioned when. They assumed she was home. They assumed nothing was wrong. I left the building with a growing sense of dread pressing against my ribs. I tried calling again and again, Each attempt died with the same disconnected tone. I opened our message thread and scrolled through the long trail of words we had shared, each one now feeling like a distant echo. I typed a long message asking if she was all right, if she needed help, if something had happened. The message remained unread. By late afternoon, panic had replaced every hopeful thought. I walked the busy streets with a hollow feeling, the noise around me fading into a distant buzz. I kept replaying every conversation, searching for signs I had missed. She had spoken of fears, of uncertainty, of wanting a future. Nothing suggested she would simply vanish. Desperation led me to take a taxi to the small apartment building she once mentioned. The driver dropped me off in a quiet neighborhood where stray dogs slept in patches of shade. The building looked old, but well kept. I climbed the narrow stairs, each step tightening the knot in my stomach. When I reached her door and knocked, there was no sound inside. I knocked again, harder. A neighbor, an older man with gentle eyes, stepped out of his apartment and asked who I was looking for. When I said her name, he frowned slightly before telling me she had moved out 2 days earlier. 2 days. Before she held my hand by the river. Before she looked at me with soft eyes and whispered about the future. Before she made promises under neon lights. It felt as if the floor tilted beneath me. I asked if he knew where she had gone, but he only shook his head, said she packed quickly, said she seemed in a hurry, said he thought she was heading north. That was all he knew. I stood there, stunned, unable to form a single coherent thought. Everything felt unreal, as if the world had slipped out from under me without warning. The woman who had once felt closer than anyone in my life had vanished without explanation, leaving nothing behind but a trail of memories that now felt like shadows. That night, I sat on my hotel bed staring at my phone, waiting for a message that never came. I kept hoping the door would knock, that she would appear with a story, an apology, a reason. But the hours passed in agonizing silence. The city outside felt heavier than ever, its lights cold and distant. By dawn, I understood something I had been fighting to accept. Whatever we had built, whatever promises we had shared, whatever future we had imagined together had collapsed in an instant. She was gone. Not slowly, not gently, but completely. And she had left me with nothing. The flight home felt nothing like the one that had carried me toward her. When I first travelled to Thailand, anticipation filled every part of me. The return was the opposite. My body moved through airports on autopilot, my thoughts drifting in slow circles that always ended in the same place. Her silence, her absence, the unanswered questions that clung to me like a second skin. I kept checking my phone even though I knew it was useless. There were no messages. There would be no explanations. When the plane landed in my coastal town, the familiar scent of salt in the air struck me with unexpected force. It should have felt like home, yet everything seemed strangely dim. The harbour looked smaller, the streets quieter. Even the clang of metal at the shipyard felt hollow. I had left as one man and returned as another, carrying a weight no one could see, but one that pressed against me with every step. My apartment greeted me with stillness. The walls were exactly as I left them, yet they felt colder. I set my suitcase down and sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the space where her voice once echoed through my phone, where her laughter had filled the late nights. I realized I had built a world around someone who now existed only in memories. The silence felt sharper than any loneliness I had known before her. The first few days passed in a haze. Work became my refuge, the only place where routine shielded me from my thoughts. But even there, her presence lingered. I would find myself pausing in the middle of a task, remembering the gentle curve of her smile, the hope in her voice when she spoke about a future she claimed to believe in. I replayed our last night countless times, searching for signs I'd missed. Everything felt too genuine to be false, yet everything had unraveled without a trace. Friends noticed the shift in me. They asked if the trip had been worth it. I told them it had been beautiful. I told them it had been unforgettable. Both statements were true in their own way, but neither captured the deeper reality. I kept the rest to myself. How do you explain the kind of loss that comes without proof or reason? How do you describe being left behind by someone who had never fully belonged to you, yet somehow held your heart more closely than anyone before? Nights were the worst. I would lie awake listening to the distant sound of waves, the only reminder that the world kept moving even when I felt stuck in a moment that refused to fade. I reread our conversations, each message a small piece of a puzzle that no longer fit together. Eventually I stopped opening them. Eventually I stopped checking her profile. Eventually I allowed myself to believe she was gone for good. As the weeks passed, the sharp ache softened into something quieter. Not acceptance, not forgiveness, but understanding. I realized that people sometimes leave, not because their feelings were false, but because their fears are stronger than their hopes. Maybe she was overwhelmed by the life she imagined with me. Maybe she felt unworthy of the future we discussed. Maybe there were burdens she never revealed. Or maybe all the beauty between us had been nothing more than a passing light that was never meant to last. I would never know. One evening I returned to the pier at sunset. The sky glowed in soft shades of orange and violet, the kind of colours she once described from her hillside at dawn. I stood there listening to the water roll against the rocks and realised something important. Her leaving had shattered me, but the connection we shared had awakened parts of me I had long buried. She made me believe in possibility again, even if it ended in a way I never expected. She showed me that my life could stretch beyond the quiet walls I had built, that my heart was still capable of reaching for something more. I had travelled halfway across the world for a dream that dissolved in a single morning, yet I did not regret going. The pain felt real, but so did the moments that came before it. Not every story ends with closure. Not every promise becomes a future. Some stories live only in the space between two people for a brief time, shaping them in ways that last long after the other person is gone. As I walked home from the pier, the night air felt lighter on my skin. The stars above were faint but present, small points of light that reminded me that even the quietest sky holds its share of brightness. I did not know what waited ahead for me. I only knew that life had changed, even if the ending was nothing like I imagined. I had loved, I had lost, and I'd learned the cost of believing too deeply in a promise made beneath neon skies. Yet in the empty spaces she left behind, I began to find the pieces of myself again. And that, in its own quiet way, was the beginning of my return.